राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजना 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 यमुना तीरवनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol Jai Om Vishnupad Panamahansa Paravrajagacharya Stottarjata Shri Srimad Srila Vaishnava Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nama Acharya Srila Thakur Haridas Ki Jai प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय वृंदावन धाम की जय नवदीप मायापुर धाम की जय गंगा देवी की जय यमुना माई की जय भक्ति देवी की जय तुलसी रानी की जय समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय ग्रंथराज श्रीमद्-भागवतम की जय ISKCON BBT संस्थापक आचार्य श्री प्रभुपाद की जय गौ प्रेमानंदे all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to Sri Sri Guru Gauranga Jai Shri Prabhupada Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namine Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayataya Kripadhye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhave Nama Namaste Gaudavani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namosite Namaste Gaudavani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. In Bhagavad-gita chapter 4, text number 10, Krishna mentions the austerity of knowledge, and there's a great deal of commentary on just what that means. But to summarize, we can say that the austerity of knowledge is, number one, you first have to take the trouble to acquire it, and people don't do that normally. The second thing is that after having acquired that knowledge, you have to do something about it. It forces choices, individual choices. And we have to act on what we've heard. Otherwise, we're cheaters. And then finally, the third austerity of knowledge is that one has to encounter those who are not pleased to accept it in this world. This is a hallmark of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's life and his preachings in this world, is that he embraced the austerity of knowledge, defined in any of those ways, all of those ways. And we're all the better for it. We wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for his decision. So we all have to humbly bow at his lotus feet and beg for his mercy today, being the anniversary of his holy appearance in this world at Jagannath Puri. We'll hear more about that. His father, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, another great acarya, very powerful preacher, reformer, you can say, and just at the turn of the last century, he saved Gaudiya Vaishnavism from oblivion, practically speaking. It was so much in the hands of decadent hypocrites, really, that it would have been gone forever had he not seen the need of the hour and acted appropriately. And he faced various challenges, but mainly from three classes of persons in this world. He had the highly prejudiced British rulers. We know that the British were, well, in the beginning, actually, the British were very favorable to Indian culture. They adopted the culture, they respected the culture, they intermarried with the local people. But once it became a commercial venture, and once the government of England took over that venture, then things very quickly corrupted, as they always do in this world. And so they took their prejudices and systematically, intellectually attempted to completely suppress the Vedic culture and destroy the people's faith in that culture. And they nearly succeeded, because today we're still fighting with the vestiges of what they started. So that was one challenge that Bhaktivedanta Thakur faced. Another was the Western educated Indian followers of those British. Either they were what we call chamshis, trying to get ahead in their careers, or they were actually convinced of what they had heard. Think about this. Whatever we know of Hinduism today was fomented about 100 years ago, largely through the efforts of British-educated so-called Hindu reformers, who themselves were very clueless about what traditional Hinduism actually was. I could name names, but I'll just name a few dead ones. Brahmo Samaj, for example, is no longer a force to deal with, but in Bhaktivedant's time it was. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur had to deal with that. There are various missions that were started in the name of Advaita, pseudo-Advaitans, neo-Advaitans, all of them. The British actually privileged the Advaita philosophy of Shankar in some form or another, because they saw very clearly, actually Prabhupada said, The British are the most cunning people on the planet. They saw very clearly that if this, well, they saw what Madhvacharya saw also. Madhvacharya predicted that if this Advaita philosophy is allowed to spread and become popular, then all morality is finished. And without morality, nobody has an on-ramp to Krishna consciousness. So the British saw this as a very effective means of attaining their goal of destroying Hinduism and destroying Vedic culture here in India. Of course, that was a commercial venture. It still is, as a matter of fact. If you think you got independence in 1947, look around you. What does it mean to work offshore? Those in the IT profession know that. Working onshore means you're in somebody else's country, or at least following their clock. The descendants of the very people who used Indian labor to collect Indian salt from the Indian Ocean, sent it to Britain for refining, and brought it back and sold it to the same Indians who gave it to them. This was what Bhaktivedanta Thakur was facing. So that was there, and also their followers were there, including so-called Hindus who were actually more interested in advancing British conceptions, European, Western, in general conceptions. And then finally, the uneducated masses, lower classes, led by deviant groups like the Sahajiyas and the caste Goswamis. All these persons. Bhaktivedanta Thakur was extremely effective in countering because of his character and because of his learning also. He took the austerity of knowledge upon himself. You all know, or will hear also. It was a very exemplary search for the absolute truth, a very objective, impartial search for the absolute truth that brought Bhaktivedanta Thakur actually right back to the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Bhaktivedanta Thakur had his own ways of dealing with each of these challenges. Every age brings its challenges. We all have challenges now. They could not have imagined, I think, the challenge of dealing with clones, cloned human beings, or cloned animals for that matter. China just cloned a new kind of high-producing cow. Did you hear about this? It was a newsworthy thing. Produces like 10 times as much milk as normal cows. Anyway, every age has its respective challenges. And Bhaktivedanta Thakur was exceedingly successful at creating respect for Lord Chaitanya and his ideals and his true followers. So, nonetheless, he felt constrained to pray to the Lord for a ray of Vishnu who might take his mission into the next generation and, in fact, take it worldwide as well. And his illustrious son, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, was the answer from the Lord to Bhaktivedanta Thakur's prayer. He was at once highly orthodox and dignified, and yet he was radically innovative and intense. Those who have taken on the austerity of knowledge, they often have this character. He was brazen enough to ignore traditional taboos. For example, once he arrived at Radha Kund, riding in a convertible Jaguar, and flanked by two brahmacharis wearing business suits. If you can imagine, even in 2023, this would raise eyebrows. What to speak of 100 years before? It was unthinkable, outrageous behavior. Really outrageous. And his whole point, he was deliberately trying to stir up the pot, so to speak, because his whole point was that you have to get beyond this stereotypical, ossified paradigms within which we box or try to work in Krishna consciousness. You have to get beyond that and see the Saragrahi Vaishnava, become a Saragrahi, somebody who actually knows the real essence. So he did that. He even suggested that his preachers could serve meat in their overseas branches. Can you believe that? If that's what was required to get the Europeans to participate. So he was radical on one hand, in one way. But he was also extremely conservative in other ways. And he was called Acharya Kesari, Lion Guru, because he was often confrontational and even aggressive, militantly aggressive in his efforts to preach Krishna consciousness and attack the wrong ideas and try to spread Krishna consciousness, which required that. And still does, as a matter of fact. So he was preaching the pure ideals of Lord Chaitanya, and he also was characterized by an extreme intolerance of impersonalism. We've already mentioned some of those missions. The so-called reformers in the 19th century, all of whom lacked sambandha gyan. This is the characteristic that they all shared and still share to this day. They lack sambandha gyan. We should be careful that we don't lack sambandha gyan. We also have to embrace the austerity of knowledge in order to avoid Krishna consciousness again becoming frozen into this mundane paradigm that they faced 100 years ago. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur chiefly directed his preaching efforts at two classes, the Sahajiyas and the Caste Goswamis. In those days, the Caste Goswamis were in control of Vaishnavism. They had infiltrated the ranks of Vaishnavas. That's what happens when you don't cultivate the austerity of knowledge and you can't see clearly what is the distinction between matter and spirit. You can't understand what's bona fide and what's not bona fide without sambandha gyan. So it has to be there. First, it has to be there. It's kind of like in Sanskrit. If you want to learn Sanskrit, you will not even be able to decipher one sentence until you know how the Sandhi rules work, how words combine. So it's an austerity. You have to learn it. And there's a lot of memorization involved. It's difficult. So in the same way, we all have to cultivate this sambandha gyan. Otherwise, we can become sahajiyas, we can again become smartas, we can become non-devotees in the guise of Vaishnavas, impersonalists, adi, adi, adi. So chiefly through translating and publishing, distributing many authoritative scriptures, as well as writing his own books and commentaries on those scriptures, and also even through public lectures and personal meetings with the leading members of society, intellectuals, politicians, kings, foreign missionaries even, all kinds of people, the movers and shakers, so to speak, of society of his day. He was prepared to dialogue with them. And he continuously rectified the prevalent misconceptions about Lord Chaitanya among all these groups. Because everyone had the wrong ideas. Everyone, and especially 100 years ago, I think even less so today. I mean, today nobody cares. But 100 years ago, when people had a little bit of morality, they looked down upon Krishna even, what to speak of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because Krishna, in their estimation, Krishna is dancing with others' wives in the dead of night. Now in 2023, that's maybe it's a qualification rather than a flaw. You're seen as weird. What do they call incels? So he was constantly dealing with this kind of thing, but he won great respect for Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and he fomented a renaissance of Vedic culture in general and of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in particular, especially among the educated. Most of his actually disciples were from high-class families, wealthy families, zamindar families, Brahmin families. And his efforts ultimately flowered into the tangible manifestation that he dubbed as Gaudiya Math. And then much later on, ISKCON, ultimately, as I said earlier, we're all sitting here because of his efforts. Siddhanta boliya chitte nakara alas iha haite Krishna lage sudhrida visha manas. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami tells us in Adi Lila chapter 2 text 117, don't shy away from philosophical discussions. Don't shy away even from philosophical controversies, because discussing these things in a civil manner, of course, and with faith, and having already developed some degree of sambandha gyan, otherwise it's hardly useful. But discussing these things always sharpens our minds. It prevents us from lapsing back into laziness or the assumption that I'm already Krishna conscious. We have to discuss philosophy. We have to embrace the austerity of knowledge and acquire and apply and repeat, in our own words, this Sambandha Gyan in particular. Why Sambandha Gyan? Why not Abhideya Gyan and Prayojana Gyan? All three of them are there, but it's a hallmark of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's preaching that he emphasized clear Sambandha Gyan as a prerequisite, because it is a prerequisite. Srila Prabhupada explains this in his purport to that verse. There are many students who, in spite of reading the Bhagavad-gita, misunderstand Krishna because of imperfect knowledge. Atma aparigyana mayo vivado hi astiti nastiti bhidarta nishtaha. Krishna tells Uddhava in the 11th canto. People who, on the basis of imperfect knowledge, means slight, well, as, who was it, Francis Bacon, I think he said, a little learning is dangerous. People on the basis of their little knowledge, they nonetheless want to argue. They're more attached to speaking than hearing, even though they're still immature in knowledge. Ritvik ideology is a first-class example of this. Both the logic and the method and the conclusion, all of them are wrong, because the Sambandha Gyan is lacking. So Prabhupada is saying this, this one must not do. One should be particularly careful to understand the truth about Krishna. If because of laziness one does not come to know Krishna conclusively, one will be misguided about the cult of devotion, like those who declare themselves advanced devotees and imitate the transcendental symptoms sometimes observed in liberated souls. Although the use of thoughts and arguments is a most suitable process for inducing an uninitiated person to become a devotee, neophytes in devotional service must always alertly understand Krishna through the vision, that's called darshan, through the vision of the revealed scriptures. The bona fide devotees and the spiritual master. That's three things, not one. Shastra, sadhu, guru. Not just guru, guru, guru. Three things, all three. Unless one hears about Sri Krishna from such authorities, one cannot make advancement in devotion to Sri Krishna. The revealed scriptures mention 9 means of attaining devotional service, of which the first and foremost is hearing from authority. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he appreciated this very deeply. And he considered, actually, that he said this, that speaking Hari Katha was his primary function, his primary service and mission in this world. But abandoning popular stereotypes about humility, misconceived stereotypes about humility, he did this work in a very novel and striking and extremely provoking manner. That was his hallmark, Lion Guru, as we've said. So there's one I'm going to read one excerpt from the Bhakti Siddhanta Vaibhava, which kind of encapsulates this spirit. Quote, out of actual compassion and concern for his wards, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur realistically concentrated his teachings on repeated and detailed instruction in Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan, in case you don't know yet, means understanding the relationships characteristic of Krishna consciousness. Chiefly our relationship with the Supreme Lord Himself, but not excluding our relationship with His devotees and even with His energies. All these relationships, they all have to be understood. Relationship means sambandha. That's why it's called Sambandha Gyan. This is a primary thing. It is first and foremost. And we're hearing about how Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur therefore focused on this. He warned that for those immature in bhakti, an exaggerated and imbalanced inclination for hearing the intimate pastimes of Sri Radha Krishna while insufficiently focusing on Sambandha Gyan would simply result in their becoming sahajiyas. We have seen this. In fact, we've seen this in ISKCON history within the last 30 years. It has to be said plainly. We've seen it. And he said that those eager to see and hear Krishna's form and pastimes, yet not learn Sambandha Gyan, are ipso facto prakrita sahajiyas. That's what it means to be casual devotees. Prabhupada used to typify them as casual devotees. They take everything very casually or cheaply. As I said in the beginning, more than once, it's an austerity knowledge, and we have to embrace that austerity in order to gain it. Then we have to act on it, then we have to preach the same thing. It's difficult, very difficult to do that. It's much easier to just leap into some imagined alternate reality, that I'm already a devotee, so we're transcendental, we don't need these things. This is very, very similar to what my logic teacher, Dr. Karl Potter, used to call leap philosophies. He was a Nyayika. He trained in logic. So he said, leap philosophy means when, the duality gets too difficult or complex for you, you just leap into some imaginary state of liberation. Mayavad is the chief example that he gave, but it applies elsewhere as well. Because you only have two alternatives to pure Krishna consciousness. One of them is Mayavad, or at least impersonalism. That's called Tyag. And the other one is Bhoga, which is either materialism or Sahajiyism. There's only two options, karma and Gyan. That's all that exists outside of bhakti. So, he considered that by hearing about the apparently profligate pastimes of Sri Sri Radha Krishna without systematic education in the immaculate principles underlying those pastimes, nor practical guidance in becoming free from material desires, nor even a basic grounding in virtuous behavior. Remember I said a few moments ago, the on-ramp to the highway of Krishna consciousness is morality. We call it dharma. We don't really have a separate system of ethics in Vedic literature because it's already covered. Just like psychology doesn't exist in Vedic tradition either, because it's already covered by Sankhya philosophy and by the principles on which Sankhya philosophy is resting, dharma. So, without a systematic education in the principles underlying Krishna's pastimes, practical guidance in anartha nivritti, or even cultivation of virtue, morality, it is a cultivation, keep in mind, then persons would, instead of becoming parahamsas, become depraved. It's true. We see this. Practically speaking, a textbook definition of the sahaja is that he's cultivating Krishna consciousness with an unmarried sexual partner of some sort in his mind. See? Depravity, as Madhvacharya predicted. Lack of knowledge in Sambandha Gyan. In other words, Not knowing our own identity really is what it comes down to. Not knowing that you're not your body, that's what it really comes down to. Will very much impede our quest for the ultimate goal of life. He knew this. If we make a show of bhajan by dressing as devotees and chanting countless rounds but do not read Sri Chaitanya's Sanatan Shiksha, the upshot will simply be bile secretion and namaparadha. Thus, by emphasizing Sambandha Gyan, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati aimed to inculcate awareness and acceptance of the jiva's constitutional position as an unconditional servant. This is the real reason that people take these other routes. They're not willing to be servants. That's really what it comes down to practically. That's why we go for Mayavad, that's why we go for karma, that's why we go for vikarma, that's why we go for pseudo-akarma. It's all the desire to avoid the constitutional recognition that I am a servant eternally of the Supreme Lord and His devotees. So, and among those servants, the principal ones were the Vraja Gopis. Therefore, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was constantly emphasizing the need to serve Srimati Radharani, not in a cheap sense, not in an uneducated sense, but in the real sense. How do we serve Srimati Radharani? By serving her devotees. Every one of our acharyas is representing Srimati Radharani, is in fact in their ontology a very confidential associate of Srimati Radharani, including Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself. They all have full authority to speak on the pinnacle of love of Godhead because they're part of that internal entourage. All the way from, all the way from Krishna down to the present day. So, without this Sambandha Gyan, or clear perception of one's existential position, as the basis of Shuddha Bhakti and of the authorized process of its practice, that's called Abhideya, the next thing. However painstakingly undertaking, bhajan could not reach the ultimate necessity of attaining Krishna Prem, which is Prayojana. So, anartha nivritti, higher than, a prerequisite for higher bhajan depends on at least theoretical appreciation of Shastriya truths, because Siddhanta alasa jana anartha to chade na. This is another version which says a person lazy in properly understanding Siddhanta does not give up anarthas. Or as Bhaktivedanta Thakur put it, without adequate cultivation of Sambandha Gyan, one cannot come to the stage of pure chanting. His chanting will definitely remain offensive. So it's very important. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was merciful, although so harsh in appearance. And his format was very confrontational and very, as I said, militant. He was very aggressive preaching. But at heart, his soft heart was merciful. Gaura Karuna Shakti, we've already stated. Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostate. He was the very embodiment of the power behind Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. And there is no mercy higher than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. So who is this personality? These acharyas, they're not light people. They're not small people to be taken lightly. Acharya mam vijaniyan, Krishna says, navamanyeta kardhachet. Do not at any time exercise or entertain some static conception of who these acharyas are. They're me, Krishna says. That's real Advaita. Oneness in purpose. So, the attempt not based on Bhakti Siddhanta to realize or enter into Krishna Lila must necessarily be a manifestation of either Prakrita Sahajiya or Mayavad perversity. Bhakti Siddhanta. Bhakti, we know, means, what does bhakti mean? You tell me. Someone translate the term bhakti for me. Very good. All of you are Prabhupada Anugas. You've all said pure devotional service. Generally, outside of ISKCON, you'll hear bhakti means what? Devotion. Generic. Prabhupada also made this very specific. Pure devotional service. Or, what is another one? He said, transcendental loving service. That's another shibboleth that we hear in Srila Prabhupada's books. Because he wants to illustrate that you need to be transcendental first and foremost. That is Sambandha Gyan. And you need to have some bhava as well. You're going to this stage. Putamad bhavamangata, back to 410. So, and then finally you have to do something. That's abhideya. You have to actually practically apply this, as we said. Srila Prabhupada's translation is very purposeful and very deliberate. As he said, I chose each and every word very carefully. So, and as a conscientious servitor of his own spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did this. In just short, few, concise words, he encapsulated the same purpose of Gauda Karuna Shakti Vigraha. So, far from qualifying the practitioner for reaching Braj, this cheap devotion of the Mayavadis and the Sahajas binds one in the misconception of being liberated when he's not, which is even greater an illusion than that of the conditioned souls who are simply trying to enjoy matter. Isn't it? A snake with a jewel on the hood is more dangerous than another snake. So, if you think you're liberated, then you continue with impunity, doing the same thing that you've always been doing. And you continue to mislead yourself, and you mislead others as well. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur would not tolerate that. Sri Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. Siddhanta. So bhakti means pure devotional service. Siddhanta. What does Siddhanta mean? It means a scientifically proven truth. Iti Siddham. We find this in the commentaries. When an acharya has proven his point, he says Iti Siddham. It's done. Ek mar do turkre. So this is a characteristic. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, another radical thing that he did, he gave himself sannyas, it would seem, in ordinary vision. He sat down in front of a picture and he named himself Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Outrageous behavior. But there's a method to the madness. He wants us to understand that Siddhanta, scientific truth, and Bhakti, pure devotion, they're not two different things. They're one and the same thing. And the gateway to either of them or both of them, which Krishna also discusses in, well, at least twice in Bhagavad-gita, is one and the same thing also. What is that verse? Pravadanti Balakas, he says, that the childish people say that people say karma and jnana are two different things. They're not. So in the same way, transcendental karma and transcendental jnana, they're not two different things. They're one and the same thing. And the gateway to that realization is humility, to recognize I'm only a servant, and you could not forget that in Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's presence. He would not allow anyone to forget that. That was his great mercy. So simply comprehending and interiorizing genuine Sambandha Gyan, the first stage in Vaishnava Siddhanta, would itself imperil further advancement up to the highest rung. The Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur knew this. So, and he was very vigorously preaching this far and wide. I don't know what time it is. 8:48. You'd have to tell me when to stop. Yes, okay, so shall I stop now? Yeah. I mean, there's a very nice. Well, I won't read the whole thing. I will just summarize that. Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, way back in 1912, this is even before his father left this world, and his gurus were also present. Then, he was preaching very vigorously on their behalf and at their behest. In March of 1912, Maharaj Maninder Chandranandi invited Gaur Kishore Das Babaji to come and speak in the Kashim Bajar Sammilani, a meeting of Vaishnavas, a forum arranged at his palace for presenting devotional topics. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji said, "I'm not a gifted speaker, and without getting Mahaprabhu's permission, I'm unwilling to come. But you better request Siddhanta Saraswati," he was known in those days, to come and speak instead. So he did. He invited him. This Maharaj was famous for philanthropy, and he patronized many different fields of learning, but chief among them, he was known for patronizing Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but he wasn't discriminate. Why? Because he was a Kanishta Adhikari. What does Kanishta Adhikari mean? He did not embrace the austerity of knowledge. He remained in this, well, like a drop of water on a lotus leaf. At any time, if your faith is not solid, at any time, you can just roll off and back into the water of the ocean of material existence, which is composed of the tears of so many conditioned souls who are drowning therein. So this Maharaj was not so discriminate, and so he was inviting all kinds of persons pretending or presenting themselves as Vaishnavas. And as we said earlier, they were not necessarily ready to have their positions jeopardized or even threatened by somebody preaching some uncompromising philosophy like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which required absolute honesty because they didn't possess absolute honesty. So they were not so eager. On arriving in Kashim Bajar, Siddhanta Saraswati found himself surrounded by the very charlatans he was sworn to attack. And they already feared him and were not inclined to be upstaged by him. So this is a summarization given by Ananta Bashu. Ananta Bashu later on became known as, anybody know? Ananta Vasudeva. Practically the leading disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Sorry? Okay. So he arrived and he found so many august persons were there, but he saw that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur offered obeisances to everyone he saw. This used to amaze people because the big Acharya, he just offered obeisances to everyone. So he saw this, but he also saw that he wasn't eating anything. Even though the Maharaj was sending tremendous quantities of very rich foodstuffs, palatable things to all of his guests, he was that wealthy. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, throughout the 5 days that he stayed there, he didn't take anything at all. He completely fasted from everything except water, and on one occasion he took a tulsi leaf. Why? This is the question. So, the answer is illustrated by the behavior of those persons. They gave him no more than 5 minutes to speak, and they also said the topic, they dictated the topic that he could speak about. You can speak about Poramaya in Navadvip, you know, the famous Durga Devi temple in Navadvip. That's what they told him. In other words, if he's going to speak at all, let him speak on something irrelevant for a short period of time. This is what they allotted to him. And even then, as soon as he began to speaking something, he was so incisive and so inescapably true that they were immediately feeling threatened, and they cut him off before even the 5-minute period was up. This is why he wasn't eating, actually. So eventually he left, actually, because he found that the Maharaj tried to ask him, why aren't you speaking anything? Why aren't you? He said, well, if I cannot speak Harikatha, if I cannot act as a representative of Lord Chaitanya, then I have no right to eat what you're sending to me. That's what he said. Whatever his real reasons were, we can imagine. But Anyway, he left. He was uncompromising in this way. And he went to the train station, and even the Maharaj rushed to the train station to try to persuade him to come back. The Maharaj was feeling terrible about this, but he refused. And this is, he went back to Navadvip. He came back to the Gaudiya Math, and he came to his own place there, and he had to walk some distance up until dawn. He was traveling all night. And then finally he broke his fast there after 4 days. Not hearing the lectures of the so-called Vaishnavas, neither eating anything that they had offered him. He was uncompromising in this way. So he was known for this, and many things that we can learn from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, this uncompromising preaching, direct preaching, and aggressive preaching of Siddhanta, Shastra Siddhanta, the truths of the Shastra regarding devotional service. This was his primary characteristic, and he aimed himself at the Sahajas and the Jata Gosais in particular, and there were even attempts made on his life, and so much biography I'm not going to go into because we're out of time now. But hopefully we'll hear something about that in the coming moments. But for now, I'm going to end here. And again, reiterate that all of us should take this day to hear from and about Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and then do something about what we hear. And the first thing we should do about what we hear is offer our prostrated respects, dandavats, at the lotus feet of this great Acharya, grandfather, spiritual master in the case of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, great-grandfather for others, and beg for his mercy, because all of us are requiring this so much. There's a great advantage in being a grand disciple or a great-grand disciple in that the grandfather is more kind to the grandson even than the father is kind. So we can take shelter of that. Even though Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is a little bit scary because of his uncompromising, forceful character, still, we should know this, and we should take shelter of this fact, and we should humbly submit ourselves and pray for his mercy, that we can ourselves advance towards his ideal. Someday, somehow, against all the odds. That's called Asha Banta, hope against hope. Okay, so thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.